If you found yourself wondering whether you might have ADHD as an adult, but also thinking, this doesn't make sense because I was fine as a child, this is something a lot of women experience. And there's a really important reason why ADHD can feel like it suddenly appeared, especially for women, even though it hasn't. I'm Dr. Emma Bagnall, a clinical psychologist and a late diagnosed ADHDer, and I talk about ADHD in women, especially the kinds of experiences that often go unnoticed or misunderstood. Now, a lot of women reach this point where things feel harder than they used to, more overwhelming, harder to stay on top of everything. And there's this thought of, why can't I cope the way that I used to? And then ADHD comes into the picture, but it doesn't quite add up because it feels like this is something new, especially if you were someone who did well in school, seemed organized, or even was seen as coping growing up. So here's the thing to understand: ADHD doesn't suddenly begin in adulthood, but for many women, it only becomes visible in adulthood. And a big part of this is how ADHD has traditionally been understood, because most of what people were looking for was based on how ADHD showed up in boys, which often looked more disruptive and externally visible, even harder to ignore in structured environments like school. Whereas for many girls, ADHD tends to show up more internally. So instead of being seen as disruptive or struggling, you might have been daydreaming, overthinking, very emotionally sensitive, disorganized, but trying to hide it, or putting a lot of effort behind the scenes just to keep up. So it's very possible to have ADHD traits as a child, but not be recognized because it didn't look like what people expected ADHD to look like. Now, the second piece, and this is where many women really recognize themselves, is what happens when life becomes more complex. Because as you move into adulthood, you're no longer being held by external structure. You are the one holding everything together. And for women, that often includes not just practical responsibilities, but also a lot of invisible load: the emotional labor, mental load, keeping track of other people's needs, managing the home environment, alongside everything else that you're already doing. So the demands aren't just increasing, they're increasing in a way that relies heavily on the exact areas that ADHD affects. So what starts to happen is that the gap between what your brain needs and what your life requires becomes much wider and more noticeable. And for many women, that's the point where things stop feeling manageable. Not because ADHD has suddenly appeared, but because the system you were relying on is no longer enough. And this is also why many women are first told it's just stress or it's just anxiety. If this is something that you're starting to recognize in yourself, I go into this in much more depth inside my community, Her ADHD Life, where we explore what this actually looks like in day-to-day life, especially for women. But I also share shorter, relatable insights over on Instagram and TikTok if you want to have something a little bit more bite-sized. But for now, take what resonates and let this be a starting point, not something to have to figure out all at once. If you'd like more of this kind of conversation, make sure to subscribe for more content like this. And if this helped something click for you, let me know by liking this video. And it also helps more women find this information.